All right. Hello, everyone. Today I am with Johnny Campbell. He is the co founder of SocialTalent, a world leading platform for building better workplaces and elevating hiring teams and experts. And first and foremost, we just had a great conversation, not just about your product and your platform, but also your perspective and philosophy around work and the future of work. So I'm excited to learn more about you, Johnny, your story, your background, but also we're gonna dig into this a little bit. So tell us more about you and what's the impact you're looking to make on the world.
So it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Angela. And I'll start with me now. I'm a father of four young boys who are 4, 8, and 14. Married the last 15, 16 years to Jill. We have a small dog. I'm a big dog person. I've had dogs all my life. I now have only one dog after our last two died a few years ago, and we picked up a
Oh.
pandemic small dog. And I live in Dublin, Ireland, with my
Mm.
family. And I have lived in Ireland most of my life, lived in the Cayman Islands for a few years as well, back just before we set up SocialTalent. I'm a runner, so I run to keep sane rather than uh,
Mm.
fit, if that makes sense. Fitness is a nice consequence that hopefully I get sometimes, but I moved remote after the pandemic, and I largely work from home. Visit our remote our our, our co-working space every couple of weeks to meet up with folks, and like to go out and meet customers and our team for lunch and breakfast. I'm a big breakfast person. So that's me today. My background, I started life as a recruiter professionally out of university, fell into recruiting, accidentally went for a job to get a job and realized I was being interviewed to be the recruiter. So I winged it. And 5 interviews later, in 1998, I became a recruiter. And then after, 10 years or so of doing that, obviously I thought I knew everything. So I thought I'd set up my own recruitment company and met somebody else I wanted to do that with. I didn't want to do it by myself. And Vince, my business partner, and I set up a recruitment business just after just going into the recession that was '08 that we didn't know was a recession.
Mm.
Through those trials and tribulations, we spun out SocialTalent, moved it online, grew the business over the last decade or so. We service about 120 very large customers globally and their teams, with several hundred thousand users logging into the platform every day to learn. And we help teams in the areas of hiring, leadership, and employee development through our online platform. And I kind of accidentally ended up there. My roots, I grew up working from a middle class background, but we had ups and downs where we had
Mm.
no money. And I had the type of no money that other people go, oh yeah, no money. Go, no, no, no. Like the sheriff came to our door to take all our possessions and repossess the house.
Mm.
Mother had to beg them not to several times. That kind of no money. And I went out and got my first job at 11, and by 14, I had 7 employers while I was in school. I worked before school, I worked after school, I worked the evenings, and I worked weekends. And not because my parents were sending me out to work in a coal mine, because I loved working and doing my own thing. And that stood to me all my life. All my career, apart from once, my employers were all women. I grew up seeing strong women all around me. So
Mm.
my default is that women are typically better at managing,
True,
making
very true.
decisions. Yeah, running things. That's all I had seen growing up. My father was an entrepreneur, not
Mm.
successful, but I kind of had that bug about doing my own thing. And I guess I kind of always had a chip on my shoulder. I ended up going to good schools because I got scholarships, but I didn't have the economic status of my peers. So I kind of always had a chip on my shoulder about, we never had that privilege from a financial perspective, but I was surrounded by it in school. And I guess I went into the working world not liking these injustices, for the women I used to work for who ran their own businesses, who were fantastic entrepreneurs, for family members, my own mother who had to try and fight to maintain her wages against recruitment agencies that were trying to squeeze her contracts and do all these different things when she was just trying to put food on the table for us. And I guess I saw that then further in recruiting. I saw further injustices about decisions that get made around hiring. So I guess when we built the platform, we were training recruiters initially on how to recruit. Very early on, we started adding in what I guess you'd call today diversity content. And we
Mhm.
kind of snuck it in. We met with a bunch of folks who were super passionate and more knowledgeable about this in our area, and we felt it was important content to have because we could see the influence that recruiters and recruiting teams had on big organizations as the gatekeepers of the front door. We kind of felt like there was a lot of good education that they needed, though weren't asking for it. So we kind of just snuck it in and sprinkled it around the stuff we knew they did want. And that grew legs over the years. And that's a real passion area of mine, is trying to, look at the content that the learning and knowledge that not only people need, but are not only the people want, but what we think they need. So, our content curriculum as a learning library, you think about, we've got training courses on how to hire folks, on how to develop talent in an organization, how to lead and manage talent. It very much has an agenda, Angela, and that ties into
Mm,
that better workplaces piece. We have a strong view on what the right way to build a workplace and build a culture is, and for most of our customers, we're proud to work with. They agree with that. But if an organization comes along and says that's not really for us, have you got a different version? The answer is no. We don't do a
mm.
different version. We do the version we think is right, and that's really important to us.
Love that. I love the integrity around what you've built. I am in a similar spot. I work with organizations on their culture more from a consulting perspective, and it's really difficult to kind of pierce the integrity of methodology, right? That you've built over time that includes these concepts. And I always tell people, we kind of have the formula around this stuff. We've studied it, we've tried, we've tested it. So I'm glad to hear that you have this integrity. And your story is so fascinating as to how you got here and the perspective. I love this idea of recruiters hiring teams as gateways into organizations, and thus kind of being that first point of contact. So I'd love to hear that piece connected with the future workplace, which is kind of here, right? I know we're saying like the future of work. I keep saying like we've just, because of COVID, because of many other factors, we've kind of leaped. What are some of the skills you're building other than DE and I? What are some of the other skills that you're future proofing, hiring teams, recruiting teams to be better gatekeepers, essentially?
So our focus is on what we call core skills, or what most people maybe would call soft skills. And what is a soft or core skill? To me, it is a skill that transcends all roles, whereas let's say the opposite will be a hard skill, which is particular to a career or job. So learning accountancy and debits and credits is particular to accountancy, and that's a hard skill. Or marketing, um, traditional marketing might be a hard skill, whereas
Mm-hmm.
leadership, hiring, um, how do you basically prioritize work? How do you manage teams? These are all kind of general or core skills that are required in every profession and every role. And that's kind of where we focus our attention, on those core skills, first of all. When you look at hiring, it's kind of really looking from the employee journey perspective. It's like you're going to get hired, you're going to want to develop, and you're going to be led. And everything comes from doing those three things right. So getting the hiring right, which is not just the decision making around the hiring, the process, but the onboarding, but it's all of those things. The right processes, and there's different stakeholders get involved in that. There's professional TA or recruiting teams, there's hiring managers, there's interview panelists, there's HR folks, a whole bunch of folks who get involved in that decision. And if they're aligned doing it right, you can make really great decisions where you hire call it the right people, and the right people deliver. They're motivated, they're happy, they perform for the organization, they develop further in the organization. That's what right looks like, if you like. And then you've got leaders. Leaders have a big role in hiring for sure, but they have a bigger role in onboarding, developing, bringing the best out of that talent. And I always look more at the sports coaching method, which is, if you look at any sort of team or individual sport, the coach is forgotten about. Like, who's the coach for some of the Olympians that we celebrate? Who's Usain Bolt's coach? Like, nothing is spoken of her or him, because that's the right job of a coach, is to allow the star, which is the talent, to shine, and to
Mm.
support that person, motivate that person, drive that person, make sure that person has everything they need to succeed, including motivation, including resources, and to then succeed. That's what a leader looks like. A leader doesn't necessarily take the limelight, right? They allow others to perform. That's the job of management. And then you've got the development piece. And in the development piece, we live in a world where there's a massive shortage of so many skills, and not just STEM skills, which is what most people think about, but skills in everything. And there's a lot of businesses who focus on upskilling and reskilling folks, and some great platforms that can teach you to be a software developer or a marketeer. But what we focus on, again, because they're hard skills, we focus on all the soft skills that people forget about. If I say to you, Angela, you could be a computer engineer tomorrow, and here's online training that could turn you into a Ruby on Rails developer. First of all, do you want to be? Is that the thing you should do? Great. If I
Mm-hmm.
if I do this training, how do I then get the job? How do I succeed at that job? How do I, network with folks who might be hiring for those roles? What does that look like? There's a whole lot of stuff that's necessary around that nobody addresses. They assume that by sitting in front of a computer and watching videos about how to do some hard skill, that person is going to be successful in their career there. That's just not the truth, right? So we really focus about the soft skills or the core skills around that drive better mobility for folks, give more opportunity, better thinking. How do you, because, getting a job, is maybe 20-30% around the skills you have. It's about access, network, how you position yourself, all those other things. And someone needs to do a good job of teaching people how to do that well. Because just like you said about the work you do with organizations around culture, where you kind of go, there's a right and wrong way. It's been written down before. This isn't a mystery. It's not a mystery of how to be successful in career mobility and career progression. It's just not well distributed, that knowledge.
Mm.
So I'm all about distributing that a little bit more evenly to folks who perhaps have no access to it today.
Mm. No, that's wonderful. And I think these, core. I love core skills versus soft skills because I usually call them like hard AF skills because they are the hardest of all skills. Technical skills, sure, they're difficult to obtain, but those core skills are so important, and in reality, they are what really drives a business forward. But it also provides skills that people use when it comes to motivation, feeling like they're contributing, feeling like they're a part of something larger than themselves. So I would love to shift our conversation a little bit to, from a talent perspective, right? So we've talked about some of the skills that you're infiltrating within organizations through hiring teams, through recruiters, through broader teams. But we're at a very interesting spot right now when it comes to the market and talent. And we've heard a lot of different terms, right? We just love the buzzwords these days. Like a decade ago, it was war on talent. Now it's the Great Resignation and quiet quitting and all sorts of stuff. Uh, what are your thoughts on that? Where are we in the state of talent, and what are we getting right and what are we getting wrong when it comes to attracting them?
So at the time of recording in early 23, where we are right now, the Great Resignation of 2022 is over. It is
Mm.
gone. Um, and I say that because I talk to our top customers who employ between 10 and 700,000 employees, 10,000 and 700,000 employees, big employers. And those individuals share with me that they had attrition rates up to 25% last year. And those attrition rates fell to less than 5% as the year closed. So there was so much movement of talent last year, like numbers we've never seen before. And the CEO of LinkedIn shared this at their Talent Connect event last October when they saw this movement rate go fourfold on the LinkedIn platform, like just a measure of people changing their employer on LinkedIn, right? Which across their
Mm.
whatever number of 100 million members, it's pretty statistically valid. And it went 4x in a year. They did never see
Mm.
it in the history of their platform, right? So we all felt this. That's gone. Fears about the economy, about inflation, about war in Europe, or in different things have led to, for whatever reasons, folks just not moving jobs as much. But there's still very few talented people um, available, just wandering around looking for a job with all the skills that employers are looking for, right? We still have these big skill gaps. In fact, the skill gaps are in so many industries, in industry we don't think about, like hospitality. in manufacturing, in distribution, and retail. You can't get retail staff. You cannot get F&B servers in a restaurant anywhere in the world today, right? So, like, it's not just these high skilled office jobs, which maybe we would have traditionally only thought of. It's just everywhere. It's really hard to get folks to do anything, because we have almost full employment in most markets. In the US, we have, yes, we have some high inflation. We have other economic indicators that perhaps aren't great, but employment's great. It's still really strong. It's amongst the strongest levels it's been in 2 decades, right? So on a kind of macro level, you have this situation where, whilst the movement within the market has slowed right down, there isn't really any net new talent out there. So it's still really difficult to find talent. But what happened last year, because we were just moving the chairs, we were playing this game of musical chairs all year long, right? And I had started the previous year, this great resignation. We constantly had people shifting in and out of our organizations. And we were just constantly trying to make them happy, right? Both to keep them, because we were afraid of everyone leaving. Because if 1 in 4 of your team is likely to leave this year, you really want to keep everyone. And then you knew people coming in, and we're like, we have to make them happy because they're just in the door. Let's make them so happy. And I think in 2022, for all these reasons, a lot of companies perhaps lost their focus, and they shifted their focus from a people and ops perspective to just make everyone really happy, satisfy their demands no matter what, because that's going to solve our problems. And that's a really understandable reaction. Salaries went up, which contributed to inflation, right? Don't get me wrong. But also the terms and conditions expanded, which for a lot of folks was necessary and really good. But
Mhm.
companies started doing things that were never done before, like providing supports that were unheard of even 3 years previous, right? And we talked before we went on air about ERGs that popped up for topics that were surprising. It's kind of like there was almost an ERG for everything, as opposed to ERGs for folks who really needed or were marginalized or disenfranchised or not given the same opportunity. There seemed to be these new clubs and communities and resource groups for kind of everything, because everyone needed a club. Everyone needed a badge and needed to get rewarded and told they're brilliant. Every manager was just looking for their teams to just give them top scores. Great manager, love you. And because the companies are going, well, you can't have your people leave. That's disastrous for us. And you got to keep these new people we spend so much time hiring. And that doesn't create a positive culture, right? It doesn't create the
Mm.
kind of culture that I've seen work. And I can expand on what is a good culture versus that. But I think we are suffering from that in early 23, a bit of a hangover of that. As companies retrench, trim staff, reorganize, it's being felt everywhere. It's just a shock to the way people in ops teams and organizations were treating folks last year, that that gap, that dissonance is unsettling for people this year.
Hmm. Yeah, it feels a bit scattered. I would agree, and this kind of reflects, I think, some of the when I'm working with clients in particular, when we're coming in and they've tapped us to say, help us with a strategic approach around our culture. We often step into things like the tea station, or the food trucks, or the ping pong tables, and all these surface level things that, in theory, sure, they're fun, they're great, they might make people happy, but what you're getting to, I think, is more sustainable, positive, healthy culture, and how do we really put our energy towards closing gaps in a strategic way and doing things that create equity. And when we talk about equity, it's equal outcomes. So sometimes we get equality and equity confused. And a lot of times I think organizations are looking at equality. Like, let's just peanut butter it all over the place and see what happens. When in reality, you need to get to know your people as humans. And that helps you understand what they need versus maybe just this like happiness satisfaction play that you're talking about. So I would love to hear more about good culture, how you kind of like parallel that to what you just talked about, and what would good culture look like from your perspective?
So to me, the ideal business, right? So when we talk about building better workplaces, what does a better workplace look like? to me, a better workplace is trying to balance the four typical stakeholders in any organization, right? And in
Mhm.
nearly every organization you can think of, you have, I'd argue, these four stakeholders. You have employees, you have shareholders, you have customers, and then you've got society at large, right? And they're the four vested interests in any organization that you have. And ideally, you are maxing the opportunity for all of those four stakeholders. What usually happens, though, is somebody suffers, right? So you have
Mhm.
great profits, you've got a great product, great employees, but you're destroying the environment, right? You're
Mhm.
or you're doing great stuff for the environment. Maybe you're really happy employees, but you can't make a profit, so your shareholders are disappointed, right? So somebody usually has to trade off against somebody else. But I believe you can actually make all four really happy. You can max all four, and the only way to do it, and I think there is only one way to do it, is by focusing on one of those stakeholders, which is the employee. By being employee centric in the right way, which is, how do you motivate people, provide them with the right resources, the right environment to thrive. They will produce great products and services that typically can be sold at high margins, that are done so in a responsible way, that drive internal employee satisfaction, that drive great results for shareholders, that produce happy customers with great products, and society at large is happy with the outcome as well. I think if you focus on any of the other three, you won't achieve that balance. You'll always trade somebody off, right? So the key is to be employee focused, right? As your kind of primary deliverable. But that's where the confusion kind of typically comes in, because there's a lot of nuance to that. On its own, that idea, go brilliant. So make employees happy and everyone's happy. It's like that. No, not what I'm saying. And this is where I came up in a conversation last week. We were talking about the difference between a culture that's a family from a work perspective. People kind of always say, "Oh, I want to work for a family. I could feel like a family. I get treated like a family." Right? Unfortunately, is like in a family, like you can't sack your brother or your sister. You
Right.
can't say, Mom, you're just not doing your job, so we're bringing a new one in, right? It's not how it works, right? Families have to stick together. You got to make it work, right? Through thick and thin. In an organization, though, the reality is you do change out the folks. Your brother can get the sack. It's like, what, we found another brother who's just better than you. Or we found a brother that has different skills that we now knew, and we don't need your skills anymore. We just changed direction. Sorry about that. That's life, right? That's more what a professional sports team is like. In a professional sports team, everything I read, I just feel more comfortable with that as the right analogy. Because in a professional sports team, you support your colleagues, right? You're there for them through thick and thin. If they've got personal crisis issues, you make space for them. You support them, as long as they're turning up and showing the commitment that's appropriate, right? If when they can train, they train. They put that commitment into the team. They're loyal. They support you as well. So you have that kind of healthy balance, which is that we're there for you, but you got to be there for us as well. Not always at the same time, but like we got to be in this together, because we got to win. And winning can be
Mhm.
winning with customers, with products, whatever that might be. But that's the reality of a business, particularly a private organization, and that can work really, really well. And you can exit out of a sports team and move to a different sports team that doesn't suit you, right? And you mentioned
Mhm.
culture. I remember last year I came across this concept of kind of three or four types of culture, right? And it was described to me as, obviously, you got a negative culture, right, which nobody wants, right?
Mhm.
That's not good. You've got a neutral culture where, listen, you're not messing up, but you're not doing anything great. And you got a positive culture, which everyone goes, "Oh, I want a positive culture. It's brilliant." But then there's a fourth, which is a strategically aligned culture. I was like, "Well, what's that?" And there was a bunch of us, 30 kind of founders in the room, and we were asked to rate ourselves and what our culture was. And I put my hand up
Mhm.
and said, I think I have a positive culture, but I don't even understand what a strategically aligned culture means, so I can't claim that one. And when we dug into it, we used Netflix as an example. Everyone uses Netflix's culture, unfortunately, as an example. I don't know if you've read Erin Meyer's latest book with Reed Hastings, but Erin Meyer's book is really good. It's a kind of update of the Paddy McCord work from years ago that she published last year. It's really interesting because it examines Netflix's culture, which, just for the record, I wouldn't work in Netflix. Not the culture for me, but it is a very strategically aligned culture. Their principles and values and how they've built the culture is very deliberate for the market they're in and the position they're taking. I massively respect that. And I think that is probably the optimal, which is, again, positive culture might be the kind of, let's make everyone happy. Whereas strategically aligned is, we have a goal and we have a way of winning in our area, and therefore we're going to align everything to it. And I think, the transparency of Netflix's culture has been positive for them in that, you know, they don't pretend to be anything but other than what they are. So if you sign up to work for them, you kind of know what you're getting, right? So you obviously buy into that. And other businesses like Tesla is known to have a culture that I know I wouldn't work in, right? But they're quite open about this, that they're there to save humanity from itself and get off the planet if necessary. And therefore, every resource possible goes into that, including your hours and your life and your time. And if you believe in the cause, we're here to save humanity from itself, you'll do that. But if you're not, like, this isn't a paycheck company, this isn't I work for a fancy company, go somewhere else, right? So again, whilst I wouldn't want to work there, I respect the fact that they understand what they're trying to do. They are strategically aligned. And I think that's what that kind of organization, when I talk about your folks that they employ, they're very clear on how getting it right around the employee to align to their strategy works, and they commit to that, and they do it very consistently. That's probably, that drives the best outcomes for those companies and those employees that want to opt into those
Mm.
cultures, of course.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point around opting in and the clarity around culture and how it's aligned. Because I do think, although we're focused on being employee focused, I do agree with you. Like, throwing spaghetti at the wall around making employees happy to see what sticks is not culture building. That's just throwing spaghetti at the wall and making things messy sometimes. Um, but being specific around why something like psychological safety is an important element to the way we get work done here. For example, if we are trying to aim for innovation and creativity, we know that building a safe culture is important for that. So how do we do that? How does that show up with behaviors? How does that show up with leadership? That is more of a strategic approach to creating a culture. And it's also, because culture, I always think about it as it's also a groundswell. So it's also a culmination of the people you've brought on. But if you're not clear about who you're bringing on, or you're not clear about your culture, people don't have the opportunity to opt out. And I've seen a lot of organizations try to mirror or mimic other cultures at the surface, right? So it's kind of that performative, like, the
Yeah.
words are beautiful, but then it's like you get that buyer's remorse when you walk into the organization. It's like, this is not what I signed up for, and that is damaging to culture.
Massively. And you look at, you know, the idea of an inclusive culture or inclusive team, right, is noble, and it's one I aspire for as well. It can be divisive, right? Straight away, you have a whole group of folks who get their back up, thinking, I got to do this inclusive leadership training, and they're kind of going, well, I know what this is about. This is some
Mm.
diversity initiative and blah blah blah. And so therefore they're resistant, and you're gonna have, you're gonna be in trouble, which means the only people who buy into it are the people who probably don't need it in the first place, because they're already aligned to the right, or most of the right ideas. So language can be really important, to just set things up, right? But it's also not very helpful to say to somebody, you need to be a more inclusive leader, because it doesn't break down what that means. It's like saying you need to be
Right.
a high performing sales team. It's like, well, who doesn't want to
Mm-hmm.
be a high performing sales team? But like, how do I get there? What does that mean, right?
Or
You
be
need,
a team player, right?
okay, as opposed to
Yeah.
what? Like, it doesn't help people. Whereas I do like psychological safety as a kind of, a subcomponent of that, because there's a lot more clarity around what that means. And it's also less divisive, right? Because you don't have to be on a side to support psychological safety. It's like, we want to create an environment where folks are happy, feel comfortable to engage in discourse, discuss without retribution. It's like, no matter what side of something you're on, that feels like some, you want to be part of that, right? So that's helpful. And there's more ground rules then, in terms of there's right ways of doing things and wrong ways of doing things in that kind of environment that's proven to work over time. And you can adopt those techniques to create a safe environment. And it's not a consensus environment either, right? That's not what we're trying to create with psychological safety. We're saying that we want to be able to encourage discourse. We want to be able to effectively argue and allow people to make good arguments. But we're going to also have a decision making process, and when we make a decision, we're going to move on from it, and we're going to also feel safe about that too, and not to keep coming back to it. So you have tactics you can really use to create psychological safety, and all of the evidence suggests that doing so in a team will lead to more inclusivity in the team members, right? So inclusivity is more of an outcome in that situation from a tactic
Mm.
that's easier to get your head around. And that's where, I think concepts like psychological safety work really well because folks can get their heads around it, can really actually adopt it. You can operationalize that. It's really hard to operationalize inclusivity. It's like, what does that mean, right? Allyship, again, is another good concept I like because it's quite tactical. How do you show up and be an ally to your colleagues? There are very specific tactics you can employ to be a good ally, right? And therefore you can break it down as a colleague and go, I should do these things. And I can recognize these scenarios, and there's a thing I can do that makes me a better ally, and a thing I can choose not to do that makes me a poor colleague or a poor ally to somebody. And so if it becomes more clear, and you can break it down to those concepts and give people real tools to help their colleagues, help their workplace, and help themselves. So I think it's breaking down bigger concepts into more digestible, operationally kind of easy to understand concepts is what our job needs to be.
Mm. Well, I'm glad you said that because as an organizational psychologist, that makes me happy. We focus on behavior change, right? Behavior. So we get to, if I was rolling a camera, what would I see? What would I see? What would I feel? And that's how culture change actually happens. You have to get past that level of surface values or core values, that are like posted on the wall. We have to talk about what it looks like, but also what it doesn't look like, and that's equally as important. And I'm sure your product, uses that approach to really create additional learning for your audiences. So
But you have to.
I absolutely love the.
But it's why I
Oh,
hate
go ahead.
bias training. Like bias training is like, what the heck is bias training, right? You're just telling people about the problems we have, and then you're shutting it down. If that's where it ends, and unfortunately, a lot of bias training just ends there. It's like,
Mm,
okay, but how do we fix this? And I've always been a future forward person. It's like I don't like sitting there and trying to assign blame or figure out why it went wrong. It's like, well, how do we fix it? What's the way forward, right? I've always been a fixer. And if you have that mindset, which is how do we get ourselves out of this, as opposed to there's a certain amount of understanding about why we're in it that is potentially helpful, but if you don't connect that to a behavior that you can then a change
mhm.
in a certain situation, it's wasted, right? It just it's like, this is how the human mind works. Okay, there you go. Lesson's over. Everyone feels good, or somebody in leadership feels good that we rolled out some bias training. Like, no, that's not enough. You need to connect that to, well, knowing this is how your brain works. How can we change that? How can we not be reliant on our reptilian brain, right? And its primeval kind of functions and the biases and heuristics that we have. How can we stop that from happening and kind of and take more control, if you like, of our decisions? Because sometimes that's the thing, they're not our decisions. They're rooted in us, and we're not consciously making them. And we need to just learn that we can learn techniques to make more conscious decisions. And that's the bit that's really, to your point around behavior, that's the connection where it's not good enough to explain the what, and it isn't good enough even to explain the
Yes.
why. You gotta explain the how. That's the thing that
Mm.
unfortunately people leave behind too often. It's so critical.
Oh yeah, and if you look at, so I agree with you. I think acknowledging bias is important.
Mhm.
I think that we have spent a ton of money from a DE&I perspective focused on training and bringing concepts just to people's awareness, just for that conversation you just mentioned to be shut down, right? To kind of for everybody to shut down. Uh, I totally agree with you that we should be focused on behavior change. So how do you then translate that into um, awareness, but also how that shows up from a day-to-day perspective and how it shows up with interactions within ourselves, because our thoughts turn into actions, but also with our colleagues, with our leader, with our teams. So So yes, I
Maybe,
think.
maybe I'll add in a very specific example because it'd be remiss of me
Mhm.
not to give that to one of your earlier questions, right? You mentioned earlier, you asked about hiring, and I didn't answer you specifically, and my apologies for that. But how it plays out, for example, in hiring, is that you can tell people that there's a bias, natural biases in hiring processes and ways people hire. And that's all very well. But unless you connect it back to, again, standardized processes. So, for example, standardized structured questioning around specific skills that you're looking to hire for, perhaps values that your organization hold high, giving people, the structured questions to ask, a framework in which to follow up those questions and to rate answers consistently against a rubric. You need to scale that stuff out in an organization, and that reduces or removes most of the bias. And it's not, not the telling people that you have bias that does it. It's the structured process that you have to roll out and implement and then enforce and measure against and test people against regularly. That's what helps. Yes, a certain amount of awareness will go a long way, but also things like, don't say these stupid things. Like when we roll out interview training with large organizations, it usually starts with, here's the dumb shit you say that you shouldn't say, right? You kind of clear that out. And I do an exercise with folks where I kind of go, here's 10 questions. Tell me what's like a dumb thing to say. Tell me what's a perfectly fine thing to say and what's questionable. And
Mm.
the dumb stuff's easy. Everyone gets that. But the questionable stuff, most people get wrong, where they just don't understand. And it opens their mind. So, for example, I'll ask folks, is this an appropriate interview question? What's your favorite book? And most people think, yeah, sure, that's fine. And then you follow up and go, well, what if the person responds with the Quran, the Bible?
Mhm.
Like, there's so many answers to that could just open up a can of worms you do not want to open up in an interview process. That's not relevant to the process. And what the heck relevance is someone's favorite book to any interview unless you're a librarian? And even then, still not relevant. I just, it's trying to just open people's eyes, but then follow up with the how. Here's the right way to ask questions. Here's the right way to do it. Here's the things that you could do wrong introducing a candidate, setting up a Zoom interview, things you shouldn't ask. Please avoid, personal conversations like, where are you today? Really, that's why. Who's that in the background? Is that your son? Oh, he's lovely. Again, you're nice, you're being nice, but here's why you can't do that. And instead, here's a different way to set up your interview when you first come on, et cetera, et cetera. So it's giving them the real
Mm.
tactical stuff, putting in processes. That's what actually helps people.
Mm. Yeah, you try to take the guesswork out of it and the little nooks and crannies where bias can sneak in, and the objectivity at the end of the day is important, and also that balance with being, um, there's always this balance I feel like with being human centered and also like to operationalize and to create process to scale. And that's another, like, if I can think of another Venn diagram, right? We talked about business interest, employee interest. This is another one where it's like, how do we make sure we create structures that are equitable, that are fair, and then also, consistency, predictability, but also be human centered.
Big time,
It's a
big
tough
time.
job we have.
It is. And, sorry, and this is a really good point. None of it's easy. And it's
Mm.
also being forgiving on others who perhaps stumble or fail and realizing that none of us are perfect. And that's the thing about leadership. Leaders get a hard time for things that go wrong or don't go as right as others would like them to do. But being a leader is tough, right? It's really hard to
Hmm.
balance all this stuff. And individuals in a meeting, you'll say something stupid, you'll laugh at something inappropriate. And don't be hard on yourself, or don't be so hard on yourself. As long as you're willing to acknowledge the challenge, the mistake, and you move on and improve it, make a commitment to not making the same mistake again. None of us are perfect, right? But we can't be hard on ourselves, and you can't be so hard on others as well. It's, again, be forgiving. And sometimes when you are in this space and you're trying to fly the flag of more inclusivity and more equity in the organization, sometimes it goes wrong and you start really, beating on folks who aren't, in your opinion, doing a good enough job, who've erred, who fell in their journey. And it's just, I always try and, just try and take that perspective of, you gotta be empathetic to what's going on in their world. I'll close on this. I was driving yesterday and someone cut in front of us and accelerated off. And I was in the car with my wife and I was like, look at that asshole. And she's like, yeah. She was like, but maybe they have a sick kid and they got to get home for it. Maybe they are really paranoid and someone's been chasing them and they just need to get away from them. It's like, you don't know. And I was like, yep, fair enough. I'm the asshole. I just made some massive assumption based on a behavior I don't understand. I have no context to. And it's just, I think if all of us could just be a little bit more forgiving to kind of step back when we don't have all the answers, and most of the time we don't have all the answers, and just maybe be a little bit more optimistic about someone's intent and not so quick to criticize and judge and be more open minded. If everyone had that attitude, I think we'd make a lot of progress.
Hmm. So I have one last question to follow up on that, because you've got all the ideas flowing in my head here. When do we move from grace to accountability?
Um, I will always allow somebody one mistake. People make a mistake. Um, I won't allow the same mistake twice. In my kids, in my friends, in others, it's like you can err on something, you can mess up, but you got to learn from it. And if you don't, then it's all on you. The accountability is all on you. It's not acceptable um, to repeat that over and over again. Someone can make a comment, you go, you know what, that was inappropriate because it made me feel like this, and it goes, oh, I'm really sorry, I get that. I go, okay, that's okay. They didn't understand. I explained it to them. And then you go into a meeting next week and they do the same thing again. That's it, right? Maybe that's harsh, but to me, that's just a no go. I'll give you a chance. I need to give everyone a chance, but like I don't give multiple chances to folks on the same issue because I think you have to be accountable for this stuff. It's too easy to go, oh no, it's fine,
Mhm.
fine, fine, I won't do it again. It's grand, no problem at all. And then someone does it again, they do it again and again. There has to be accountability, right? I think
Mm.
again, I think I'd like to start with that, attitude of grace and attitude of forgiveness and empathy, and to go, hang on a second, I need to get to the bottom of this. You get to the bottom of it and you have a conversation. And if things don't change or improve, well, yeah, then it's on that person. Then you've done it. And again, people will mess up. They'll say silly things all the time. And I'm always willing to give someone the benefit of the doubt. To
Mm.
talk it out, you get to the real reasons. We agree what the issue is, and as long as it's done right and there's clarity and transparency, I expect it to never happen again. Then
Mm.
not on that issue because I think it's unacceptable if it happens again. You got to be accountable after that.
Mm. Well, like I said, this work is messy. We talked about these intersections between business interests, employee interests, equity and fairness, and being human. We talked about accountability and grace. I mean, I'm seeing all the little overlaps. So, just thank you for the conversation. Thanks for talking through some of the hard stuff, and talking through some important issues around culture, around hiring, around the state of the workplace. And just to really appreciate your time and insights, Johnny.
A pleasure, and thank you for your podcast, for the voices you have on. I've listened to your previous shows, and they've challenged me, and I love speakers and guests who challenge because we don't have all the answers, right? The beauty is we're learning, right? And I hope to be able to sit back and listen to this in a year's time and go, do you know what? I've changed my mind on that.
Yeah.
Because that should be everyone's attitude, is to not have that rigid mind, to be open for someone else to persuade you that you were wrong. I think that's where the grace comes in particular.
Great. And just one more thing to close us out. Tell us, Johnny, if people wanted to learn more about Social Talent, or you, or your co-founder, or your team, where could they find more information?
Type SocialTalent into Google, ChatGPT, anywhere you want to put it, Instagram, LinkedIn, you'll find us. Or reach out to me personally wherever you find me online as well. I'm always happy to help.
Thank you so much, Johnny.
Thank you, Angela.